Hi everyone, yes, to another episode of Dimitra's Dishes. Today I'm going to be teaching you how to make a pumpkin spice Ravani. Ravani is a Greek semolina cake that's infused with a delicious honey syrup, and I'm making it a little bit special because it's fall now and everybody loves the fall flavors, so I thought pumpkin would be delicious in this because it's nice and mild. In the video right before this, I taught you how to make your own pumpkin puree by roasting pumpkins in the oven and then mashing them. You can use a homemade pumpkin puree for this or store-bought. Just make sure, I do say it when we go over the instructions, but make sure if you're using store-bought pumpkin that it's pure pumpkin, nothing else in there, because right next to pure pumpkin, usually in the grocery stores, you'll see a pumpkin pie filling, and you don't want that. That has a bunch of other ingredients in there that will not go with this cake, but I think you're gonna love this one. Let's get started. So we're going to begin by mixing the dry ingredients together. I have 1.5 cups or 265 grams of fine semolina flour, 1.5 cups or 224 grams of all-purpose flour, 3 teaspoons of baking powder, and then you could use either 1 tablespoon of pumpkin pie spice from your store, or I like to make my own by combining 1.5 teaspoons of ground cinnamon. I usually go heavy and add 2 teaspoons of ground cinnamon, but I'd say that 1.5 teaspoons is the minimum. Half a teaspoon of ground nutmeg, 1/4 teaspoon of ground cloves, and 1/2 teaspoon of ground ginger. Now I'm gonna zest an orange. I need the juice for the syrup, but you need to get the zest off first. So zest a whole orange into your flour mixture and then whisk that all up, set it aside, and now we're gonna get working on the syrup because the syrup needs to cool down a little bit before we add it to the cake. So in a small saucepan, I'll add 1.5 cups of granulated sugar, 1.5 cups of water, and a cinnamon stick. I like to add a large cinnamon stick to this. Put this over medium heat and let this cook for about 5 minutes until all of the sugar melts and the cinnamon infuses the syrup really well. Take it off of the heat and add 1/2 cup of honey to this and a teaspoon of pure vanilla extract. Mix that all up and set it aside. If you want to, you can add 3 or 4 cloves to this too. It'll add more flavor, but that's totally up to you. Now we're gonna make the cake. So in my stand mixer, I'll add 5 eggs that are at room temperature with 1 cup of granulated sugar. This is gonna beat over high speed with the whisk attachment for about 5 minutes until it has a lot of volume in it and it's nice and thick. Once that happens, we could add a teaspoon of pure vanilla extract, 1/2 cup of light olive oil, and then 1 1/4 cups of cooked pumpkin puree. You don't want to use a pumpkin pie filling for this. You're just using pumpkin puree. And if you watched my video and you have your own pumpkin puree at home, I roasted a pumpkin and then I mashed it, and that's what I'm using today. You can use that, or you can use canned cooked pumpkin instead. If you're using canned cooked pumpkin, the color will vary. The fresh pumpkin that I roasted is a little bit on the yellower side, but I have used pumpkin puree that's really deep orange, and I love the way that color looks, but we're not gonna get that look today. It's totally fine. We'll add that to the eggs and whisk that up a little bit. Then I'll add the flour mixture to it and whisk it until everything is combined. Grease a 9 by 13 inch baking pan with a little bit of oil, baking spray, or butter, whatever you have. Transfer the batter to the pan and smooth out the top. This is going to bake in a preheated 350-degree oven for 30 to 35 minutes or until the cake is fully cooked. A toothpick that's inserted into the center should come out clean. You don't want to underbake this cake, otherwise once you go to add the syrup, it'll be really mushy. So if you overbake it, it's totally fine. This is a cake that can be saved with the syrup and still be moist thanks to the pumpkin puree that's in it. Once the cake comes out of the oven, just poke it all around with a toothpick just so that way the syrup absorbs evenly. I also like to run a knife around the edges of the cake to release it from the pan and then pour all of that syrup over the top. You're going to see that it's going to pool for a few seconds and then the cake just soaks that syrup up. If you want to make a little bit extra syrup to serve it on the side of the cake, it's totally up to you, but we're going to let this cake cool to room temperature, and then once it is cooled completely, I'm going to cut this into slices. I like to cut this into diagonal slices, but I've also done this with simple rectangles or even triangles. It's completely up to you, but the cake is ready to serve. The best thing about this, other than the flavor of the cake, is the way the house smells once this is baking in there. It's just so nice. I love anything with cinnamon, and it just makes the house smell so cozy and good. But a few tips before we go on to the taste test. You can add more ingredients to your pumpkin spice ravani. I am thinking of making this with some cranberries. Dried cranberries would go really well in it. You can add some finely chopped or finely ground pecans, because pecan and pumpkin also goes well together. So does walnut. Walnut is a little bit milder than pecan, but it will also go really well inside the cake or garnished on top. Now, I love to serve this cake as is, just very simple, because ravani does tend to be a simple cake, but you can spruce this up with either a scoop of ice cream or homemade vanilla whipped cream, and then you can sprinkle some either ground pistachios or your favorite nuts on top, ground pecans or ground walnuts. Make it extra special if you're serving it for like a holiday party or a get together. If you want it a little bit more syrupy, you can make a little bit more syrup and just have it ready. And once the cake cools and all of the syrup is absorbed, if it's looking a little bit too dry for you, I know some of the syrupy desserts, we are used to having them really soaking wet with that sweet syrup, but not everyone likes that. So you can always have a little bit of syrup simmering on the side, and once the cake cools down completely, you can add a little bit more, or you can serve it on the side, and whoever likes extra syrup can just drizzle it over their piece. The options are endless, but this cake is so good. The color of it, like I said before in the video, is going to depend on the pumpkin puree that you're using. Usually fresh pumpkin tends to be a little bit more on the yellow side. Some are a little bit more orange, and I've noticed that certain brands of canned pumpkin puree tend to be really orange, and I really love that because it does make it look more like a pumpkin type dessert. But it's still going to taste exactly the same. Pumpkin has a really mild flavor. I know some people are going to ask if you could substitute other things for this. I haven't tried it, but I'm guessing maybe sweet potato and butternut squash might make really good substitutes for the pumpkin. And carrot. Mashed carrots would be great in this. You could do like a carrot spice cake. That would be delicious. I hope you guys give this recipe a try. Before I go, let's taste it. And of course, you know I have some Greek coffee brewing on the stove to have a cup later on once I'm done. This is perfect. It is so good. It's not overpowering with any flavor. I love the cinnamon in it. You have a hint of the cloves and just a tiny pinch of the ginger. That pumpkin spice mix in here is so good. I would even add some cloves in the syrup next time. I've made it so many times so far because the first time I made it, it was a mushy mess. And if you follow me on Instagram, you would have seen that, but this is just perfect this time. I hope you guys give this recipe a try. If you do, let me know what you think in the comment section down below. To get the exact measurements and print this recipe out, you could head on over to the website, dimitrasdishes.com. Thank you so much for spending time with me today. I'll see you all next time. Yes, sis.